Hey, it's Francis Lamb, host of The Splendid Table. Every week on our show, we talk about food and cooking and the meanings of food and cooking. We talk with the most interesting people in food about their techniques, their culture, and everything in between. Whether it's about how fried chicken took over the world or how Instagram changes the way people are actually eating. It's a food show where everyone is welcome. Come join us. You can listen to The Splendid Table wherever you get your podcasts.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
I guess I like the idea of transforming things, making things taste better. And I think I learned that probably through candy because I like the idea of seeing people taking raw products and turning it into candy. You want to make candy, just cook sugar to death. Now, just keep cooking it, it's going to turn to candy.
Robert King has been transforming sugar into candy his whole life. He learned how to cook in his grandmother's kitchen and has carried the practice with him for 81 years. She taught him resilience, how to take life's raw, often bitter ingredients and shape them into something sweet and nourishing. This lesson became his lifeline, especially during his darkest times. Wrongfully incarcerated and forced to pick sugarcane for 17 hours a day, and later held in solitary confinement for decades on end. All the while, King kept cooking sugar. King's pralines are a part of a much bigger story of injustice. Deep inside the Louisiana State Penitentiary, known as Angola Prison, 3 men, Robert King, Albert Woodfox, and Herman Wallace, spent decades in solitary confinement for crimes they did not commit. They were targeted for their membership in the Black Panther Party and their relentless efforts to expose the injustices within the prison system. Collectively, they spent over a century in solitary confinement and became known as the Angola Three. Despite unimaginable hardship, Robert King found a way to create moments of sweetness and defiance while in his cell, by making pralines. In this place built on forced labor, King's act became a symbol of resistance and reclamation. Here's Albert Woodfox, Robert's friend and fellow member of the Angola Three.
None of us ever broke. We all stood by what we believed in, fought for what we believed in, and suffered the consequences. King for 29 years, Herman for 41 years, and, he died 3 days after winning his freedom. He for 44 years and 10 months. They never broke us.
For this episode, I am thrilled to welcome Meat and Three reporter Jessica Gingrich as my co-host. She's a journalist and food historian who has spent the past 3 years digging deep into the world of pralines, prison foodways, and the Angola Three. Hey, Jess.
Hi, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to dive into this together, so let's get into it. I'm Taylor Early.
And I'm Jessica Gingrich.
And this is Meat and Three on HRN.
Meat and Three.
Meat and Three.
Meat and Three.
One meat, 3 sides.
Food, news, and storytelling.
A square meal. For your ears.
Meat and Three.
On first glance, pralines seem pretty simple. Just sugar, pecans, and cream. But their ingredients conceal a complex history. Sugarcane was one of the most brutal crops enslaved people were forced to grow and harvest. For our first story, Jess will take us through some Louisiana sugar history and how it intersects with Robert King's story.
Those are huge fields, and they look like they go for eons, or go from here on out into infinity. And I got to learn how to cut sugarcane real good. I mean, not that I had any choice or didn't have a choice.
King cut cane while incarcerated at Louisiana State Penitentiary, the state's largest maximum security prison. It was once a plantation called Angola, named after the homeland of many enslaved Africans. Men incarcerated there have been forced to continue working in those fields until this very day.
I had heard about how slavery was, and so I had a concept, but I did not get it before I got to Angola for the first time in 1961. When I got there, I said, wow, I really saw the act of slavery and how cruel it can be.
King's own family story is deeply connected to sugarcane. His grandmother, who he calls Mama, was one of the countless Black women who cut sugarcane out of economic necessity. She worked in the fields in Gonzales, Louisiana, 6 days a week from dawn to dusk.
They had a lot of sugarcane around the field, and the only work they had was for people like Mom who didn't have an education. And if she wanted to make 35, 40, 50 cents a day, she had to cut sugarcane. I used to hear her tell us, I had to cut sugarcane with frost, with ice on the stop, with freezing hands. It takes a toll on the body.
Sugarcane is originally from the South Pacific and Southeast Asia, and Jesuits brought it to Louisiana in the 1750s as a cash crop. Plantations soon covered the south of the state. The sugar boom brought economic growth, but came at a horrific human cost. Enslaved people endured brutal conditions. Louisiana's sugar plantations saw significantly higher mortality rates and lower fertility rates compared to other crops like cotton or tobacco.
But people seem to have forgotten history, in my opinion. They seem to have forgotten, where we came from and how we got to the point, to where we are, and the dichotomy that exists.
Slavery ended, but the exploitation didn't. As historian Rick Halpern says,
if we think of unfree labor as a continuum that stretches all the way from slavery on one end with free labor on the other end of the continuum, sugar has always relied on some form of unfreedom.
In 1961, King was sent to Angola, where he found himself trapped in a modern system of subjugation.
Sugarcane was a main crop, I think, at that time. Angola was enterprise. It was a business. I mean, it was free labor. It was a prison, manned by human labor where other humans really got rich.
Angola as a place stands as an undeniable reminder of how exploitation has shifted, not ended. Here's the heart of it. Robert King's grandmother cut cane for less than $1 a day in Gonzales. Robert King cut it for 2.5 cents an hour while in prison 75 miles away.
I lived in America that was totally different from other people, especially white people who lived in America.
King survived Angola and now speaks out against a system built on injustice.
Something needed to be done. There was a wrong that needed to be right. And I told myself as being a slave, I was convicted for a crime that I hadn't committed. And I felt the only right a slave had was the right to rebel.
When King was 6, his family moved to the Algiers neighborhood in New Orleans, where Mama earned a reputation as a cook. In contrast to the cane fields, her kitchen was a sanctuary, a place where time and again, Mama made magic, something out of nothing. Before his eyes, she alchemized sugar into pralines.
It was something that had been a tradition. I had watched my grandmother make pralines. I learned how to cook from hand-on, hard-earned experience or from passed down, knowledge from generations.
This duality reflects King's journey, struggle and resilience. Mama's hands cut cane and crafted sweetness. Decades later, his hands did too. King was released from prison in 2001. He lives in New Orleans, the city famous for its pralines. There's power in taking something born out of oppression and transforming it into something sustaining. But as King points out, this history is not just the past. The injustices reverberate into today.
It's maddening that the legacy of slavery continues on today through our modern prison and policing systems, and reaches its sticky fingers into our food systems as well.
It's not just sugar, though. Pecans also bear the mark of exploitation. Enslaved African Americans nurtured pecan trees and harvested the nuts on plantations. And a botanist named Antoine, who was enslaved at the Oak Alley plantation in Louisiana, pioneered the grafting techniques that made consistent, high-quality pecan production possible.
You know what, Jess? I was talking to my family about this episode, and I asked my dad what pralines taste like because I've never tried them before. And his response was, pretty good, duh. And then he told me about this time in his life that has never come up before. The summer before he started college at Dillard, where he picked pecans outside of New Orleans for extra cash. He said you could spend a whole morning shaking these trees and picking the smallest pecans, which were the most desirable, and still not take home much cash in your pocket. I really had no idea. Very wild. But we'll come back to Louisiana agriculture later in this episode. For our next story, Addison Austin Liu traces the history of pralines, from plantation kitchens to a source of economic empowerment.
Pralines, Pralines, this pecan-based treat might just seem like a New Orleans tourist staple, but they're woven into the history that shaped the city. Dr. Zella Palmer is an author, filmmaker, food historian, and chair at Dillard University. But back when she was in between jobs,
I used to make pralines. I used to actually work at a praline shop in the quarter. So I used to have to make pralines every day. There's nothing like fresh pralines, straight, just right when you cool it down enough where you can eat it.
French-style pralines, made with almonds, were likely created by the chef of a diplomat and brought over in the late 1700s by settlers to New Orleans. Enslaved Black women used Creole, European, and African ingredients and wisdom to create the pralines we know today. They switched to pecans, an important crop to Native Americans, due to their abundance. Recipes varied by family and were passed down through generations. Enslavers would capitalize on this knowledge to make extra money by,
let's say, lending out their skilled enslaved people, or permitting their enslaved persons to sell in places like the French Quarter.
These women were called pralinières by the French, but within their own communities, they were known by the Creole tantes or aunties. Post-emancipation, they had limited economic opportunities, but were able to sell pralines. They cooked them at home, then carried baskets full around the streets, calling out to attract customers. Many were the head of their household, and this culinary expertise provided a way to support their families. Unfortunately, this way of life began to disappear. The pressures of unaffordable vending permits favored the opening of white-owned praline shops. Black women didn't only lose their livelihood, but they were made into a caricature for white shop owners to exploit. A stereotypical mammy image arose across industries, a racist relic that portrays Black women as happy with servitude. Examples could be found until very recently, like the popular brand Aunt Jemima. This stereotype was a primary marketing tool for white praline shop owners.
They used mannequins, these kind of life-size, quote-unquote, mammies, and put them outside of their stores.
Despite this, Black entrepreneurs carved out a space for themselves selling pralines again. Loretta Harrison started the first Black-owned praline company in NOLA 35 years ago. She passed in 2022, but her family has kept the shop running in her memory. Other entrepreneurs have gone virtual, setting up online shops and making pralines from home. Street vendors are even starting to reappear at music festivals and Mardi Gras.
So for me, it was a rediscovery, and when I taste pralines, I feel like I'm tasting a part of my heritage, my legacy, and my ancestors, contributions to the making of this city and this state and this country.
Wow, okay. As we hear these stories about pralines, it's so clear how food can be a source of connection and nourishment, but also how it can be wielded as a weapon of the state, and ultimately, white supremacy. The Black Panther Party understood this. They recognize how access to healthy, affordable food is a fundamental right denied by systemic racism. So they launched their radical survival programs. That included the Free Breakfast for Children program, Free Commissary for Prisoners program, food cooperatives, and community gardens. These programs were a foundational part of their strategy to empower and educate Black communities. Now Jess is going to tell us how King, aligning with the values of the Black Panthers, found resistance and community through food and hunger.
Well, if your food is nourishment, I think people need to understand that word nourishment mean and how far it go and how far it extends. Because without food, without energy, without nourishment, everything shut down.
To understand why a man would cook pralines in solitary confinement, we have to go back to where King learned not only about hunger, but the strength that food could bring. His grandmother's kitchen, a space where love and scarcity coexisted.
When I was a kid, I was almost always hungry. I grew up, like I said, I watched my mom. I stayed in the kitchen because I was always hungry. She asked me sometimes, she'll say, Junior, peel these onions for me, which I cried like a little baby. I felt that, not just wanting, but I felt that I was needed and that I was learning something.
Among the foods Mama made for their family were pralines, a special treat.
She made candy the old-fashioned way, water and sugar and pecans and butter. This was something that was seasonal. Pecans at the time, it was just seasonal, you know. Special occasion, actually, when you have them, because it wasn't something that happened all the time.
Mama was his source of strength, stability, and sustenance. She used food to nurture family and create a sense of belonging.
She had raised 9 children, at least 11 with me and my sister. And she ran the family. She took care of the family. She made sure that we stayed a family. She did the cooking. She did the feeding.
Then, when King was just 15 years old, Mama died. Devastated, King's life took a downward spiral, ending up in Angola. Here, food was twisted into a tool of dehumanization and control. To punish people, correctional officers withheld food or served them prison loaves made from ground-up leftovers from previous meals.
They was serving you food or giving you food on the floor. So, hold up, wait a minute, something is wrong with this. Why should they throw our tray on the floor? Why would we be eating off the floor? We shouldn't have to eat off the floor, because in other places, they had cut slots. There was a slot where they could put a tray where a person could really reach it and didn't have to take it off the dirty floor.
Faced with this and other cruelties, King, Albert, and Herman found ways to fight back. In prison, where every aspect of life is controlled, the three turned to what they could control, their bodies.
We went on a hunger strike to make sure that the food was prepared properly and that we were, fed like human beings.
That was one of the most brutal times because we didn't eat for 45 days.
That's Albert Woodfox, another member of the Angola Three. Their strike brought the administration to the table, and they won back some dignity. Food slots were cut into their cells, and they no longer had to eat off the floor.
But at the same time, while I was willfully engaged in all of this, I want you to know the worst pains and pain ever experienced by me or I believe anyone else is the pains of hunger.
King realized that he could weaponize this pain into a profound form of defiance through hunger strikes. But he also recognized the power of nourishment. Tapping into the lessons learned in Mama's kitchen, King understood that food could be a source of resistance and connection.
You never realize how difficult it is to be confined to a small space, 23 hours. With me, it was reading. For him, it was cooking candy,
We couldn't buy pecans, but we were able to buy peanuts. We couldn't buy milk, but they gave us milk every morning for breakfast, and we kind of saved our milk. And we started to save sugar on the side and butter.
In the suffocating isolation of solitary confinement, King transformed his cell into a makeshift kitchen. He made pots by peeling the tops off soda cans and nested them together into a chain. Tightly rolled toilet paper, lit like a candle, served as a stove. Stirring with a paint-stripped ruler or a pencil, he'd coax candy from the milk, sugar, and butter he'd saved from his breakfast tray. Once the mixture reached a golden caramel color, he'd pour it onto paper to cool. and then sprinkled in peanuts bought from the commissary as a final touch. This wasn't about satisfying a craving for a sweet treat. It was a way to nurture a sense of agency and identity in a place designed to deprive him of both.
I can remember so many times I'd be in the hall on my hour and I'd go down by himself, and he would just be sitting on the edge of his bed and we'd be talking, and he'd hold his cans over the fire, cooking.
It was therapy for me, and then it was a sense of taking freedom while still being denied. It gave me a sense that I had some say-so over my condition. I felt good, being able to exercise something that I was restricted from doing, and that kind of helped you to stay whole. I mean, if there's such a thing as staying and remaining whole after that.
Through cooking, King reconnected to his past, and in doing so, found a way to connect with others.
Everybody knew, all the guys knew that I was making candy. You could smell smoke.
And guys would be hollering around or sending wood, put me on that candy, send me some candy, And he would, he could have made a ton of money if he was selling it, but he mostly used to give it away to guys. Part of being human, that the connection, sharing something with somebody, especially if you are isolated, 23 hours a day, you're confined to a cell.
Security knew too. They just stayed away, found some solace and some freedom in being able to do this, because I was doing something that was forbidden, and being allowed to do it and getting away with it. It was almost as if I was obtaining some of my independence.
After decades of wrongful imprisonment, King was released in 2001. He got his freedom, but will never receive justice.
No, justice wasn't finally meted out. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Before King left, a guard allowed him to say goodbye to his friends still in solitary.
It was a combination of being so happy that one of us, had won freedom, But there was also this sadness, it was. And, I remember reaching through the food slot and, trying to hug him and stuff, And he said, bro, when I get out, he said, I'm not going to stop until you and Herman out, And he did, till the day I walked out, February 19, 2016, he was waiting outside.
He devoted 15 years of his life to fighting for Albert and Herman's freedom. Now, King no longer hungers, he feeds.
He has laws gathering at his house sometime, and it'll be 20, 30 people sometime. And cooking for him is an expression of his love and admiration or respect for people that's in his life, He don't cook because he can. He cooks because it's an expression of who he is. And once the ancestors call us home, I think he'll be cooking for the ancestors, Cooking gumbo or red beans and rice or frying fish or chicken or something,
Albert Woodfox died on August 4th, 2022, from complications of COVID. Herman Wallace passed just a few days after being released. Now, almost 82 years old, Robert King is the last surviving member of the Angola Three. He's working to ensure that the legacy of resistance and empowerment he forged with the Angola Three lives on. In his own backyard, he planted 3 pecan trees, the tallest for Herman, the middle for Albert, and the smallest for himself. The trees stand as a testament to their deep roots, unwavering commitment, and the enduring bonds of brotherhood. He also plans to build the Angola 3 Legacy Center in the Algiers neighborhood of New Orleans. It's where he learned to cook with Mama, where he fell in love with the magic of transformation, and where their shared fight for justice will continue on.
I didn't think I would live to be 18, and then when I got 18, I didn't think I would live to be 25. Here I am 80. Wow. I don't know how I got here, but when I reflect on it, I think maybe I did do something right, you know? People think I did something right, and maybe it was.
King didn't just do something right. He did something revolutionary.
Whew. I just have to say, my jaw was all the way on the floor when you first told me how King was able to make his pralines in solitary confinement. Cooking sugar into candy is a science and requires even very hot heat. And it's not just enough to commend him on his innovation. It literally took my breath away when it dawned on me just how long those 23 hours a day in isolation for years must have been, especially in order for King to develop, test, and refine this technique. Learning about Robert King has made me so proud to be a part of the Black community, knowing how much resilience and joy as a people we've had to muster up just to survive. But I'm also left completely devastated and infuriated by every aspect of the prison industrial complex. Oof. Let's take a collective deep breath. Jess, can you speak to the Angola 3's work together?
Absolutely. Angola was infamous at the time for being one of the most brutal, racist prisons in the country. That's really saying something. Angola 3 stood up to this, organizing petitions and strikes to challenge the horrific conditions, racial segregation, and rampant, unchecked violence. They also cultivated a strong sense of community by sharing resources and holding political education classes.
Albert, Herman, and Robert were members of the Black Panther Party, right? Did they enter Angola as BPP members, or did their membership begin while they were incarcerated?
Yeah, so they met members of the party while in jail, joined the movement there, and then got transferred to Angola. There, they established a chapter and continued their activism, which made them targets. The officials branded them agitators, framed them for murders, and placed them in solitary confinement for decades. Despite this, they continued to organize protests. They also learned the law and filed a bunch of lawsuits against the prison. As a result of their relentless efforts, the conditions improved, but officials refused to let them out of solitary. In 2000, after 28 years in solitary confinement, the Angola 3 filed a lawsuit against the prison. This case highlighted the inhumanity of their treatment and ignited a global outcry. The state filed appeal after appeal, dragging the case on until it was finally settled in 2016. Today, it stands as a milestone in legal history, continuing to influence court cases, legislation, prison reform, and the global conversation around solitary confinement to this day. The Angola 3, like so many others before and after them, fought against the barbarity of the prison system for years before anyone outside took notice. And that legacy of both oppression and resistance continues to this day. It's really up to us to listen.
Amen. And those of us on the outside might feel totally disconnected from the prison system, but it's deeply interwoven into how we eat. When you pick up a bag of sugar at the supermarket, there's a pretty good chance the first person who touched it was incarcerated. Mandatory prison labor is responsible for much of our food production in America, a system many consider modern-day slavery. Prison agricultural labor is a multi-million-dollar industry. Goods produced by prisoners are for sale at virtually every supermarket in the country and incorporated into products sold by McDonald's and Burger King, Tyson, Riceland, and Coca-Cola. According to authorities from Louisiana Department of Corrections and Prison Enterprises, the private company that manages Louisiana's prison labor, the industry is for the benefit of inmates. They argue that incarcerated people, quote, build the skills and fortitude to help them readjust to life outside, end quote. This feels particularly insulting to incarcerated folks when you consider that Angola's workers often receive a few cents an hour as compensation for their labor, if anything at all. But currently and formerly incarcerated men are raising their voices to offer an alternative narrative. Hannah Chenard sat down with Kiana Calloway to discuss harm, reform, and hopes for the future.
The reality of our food system is sometimes darker than we imagine. At prisons all over the country, incarcerated people work in brutal conditions. They supply food to familiar brands and retailers. Forced labor is a fact of life for nearly 4,000 people incarcerated at Angola, who work the fields day in and day out. The goods they produce are sold back to the prison or on the open market, maybe to a grocery store near you. Kiana Calloway, a prison rights activist, understands this firsthand. While wrongfully incarcerated at Angola for 17 years, he was forced to work the farm line.
Louisiana State Penitentiary was once a slave complex and has never redefined its method. They're still out there picking cotton. They're still out there toiling field. So nothing has changed. Only thing has changed is the time.
Farm labor in prison is dangerous work. Incarcerated workers are not protected by labor laws that dictate occupational safety standards or guarantee minimum wage. Workers can be forced to labor in scorching heat without safety gear or water. If they refuse to work or fail to meet efficiency quotas, they can be physically assaulted or sent to solitary confinement. When Kiana went to Angola in 1996, he was forced to pick cotton till his fingers bled.
I didn't know what to do. I never saw this a day in my life. So I refused. I'm like, man, I can't go out there. I couldn't even hold my fork to eat my lunch when I went in because my fingers was just raw. And when I refused to go to work the next day, I ended up in administrative segregation for an aggravated work offense. This is not voluntary labor. And what I've learned is that the method of this space is to demoralize the mind, but keep the body.
Prison Enterprises claims forced labor is a gateway to rehabilitation. But the work at Angola seems designed to punish and humiliate inmates rather than teach them skills for the outside world. People are forced to work without modern tools in order to perform degrading and dehumanizing tasks. On top of that, most inmates working the farmland at Angola will never be released, and few others will go on to work at farms.
I've never met an individual who worked in the fields of Angola come home and pick cotton. That has nothing to do with rehabilitation.
Since Calloway was released, he's become part of a long lineage of advocates working to reform the prison labor industry. Inside the walls of Angola, inmates have a history of staging work stoppages and hunger strikes to protest unfair conditions. State and federal lawmakers have introduced legislation to ban forced labor in prisons. In 2023, currently and formerly incarcerated men banded together to file a lawsuit against Angola for unconstitutional labor practices. But there's a long way to go.
We have to really continue to work diligently toward not only just ending mass incarceration here in Louisiana, but ultimately humanizing what incarceration looks like, right? We have to put a face to this issue.
Compulsory labor is deeply intertwined with our carceral system, and it can be a window to look at other systemic injustices. When we talk about modern-day enslavement, we start to realize it's more than just agricultural work. Though forced labor is fundamental to the function of prisons, it's more for social containment and control than for profit. Beyond labor, the caging and disappearing of humans itself is problematic. Decarceration won't happen overnight, and it won't just happen by changing the language in our Constitution. But it's a place to start on a project that may never be complete.
I don't think that I will personally feel completely whole until we rectify this entire issue. And that's going to be a lifetime work.
When King was released in 2001, he was 58 years old, with almost 30 years of stolen life behind him. Finding a job proved impossible, so he turned again to Pralines for income and activism. He called them Freelines and used the wrapper to draw attention to the ongoing plight of his two comrades. He sold them at speaking events all over the world, and they became a means to raise funds and awareness of the inhumane practice of solitary confinement. I reached out to King 3 years ago for a piece about Pralines. King, ever the alchemist, transformed my naive questions into a profound lesson. With gentle guidance, he steered me beyond the Pralines to the devastating realities that had produced them. They became a portal to a more profound truth. Slavery's shadow stains the present. He challenged my complacency, ignited my consciousness, and called me in to be a better ally in the fight for justice and equality. And for this, I'm eternally grateful. King's Pralines and his story serve as a testament to our capacity for change. We can sow seeds of justice, cultivate communities of care, and create equitable futures. His quest for freedom, with all its bittersweet notes, leaves us with something truly nourishing. Proof of the transformative power that people have. King is almost 82 years old, but still fighting tirelessly for a future he may not live to see. His new mission is to build a community center where the legacy of the Angola 3 will continue to live on. We can honor the harsh realities of his experience and those of millions and millions of other Americans behind bars by supporting the work of King and others building a more just world together.
That's our show. Thank you so much for listening. We offer an immense amount of gratitude to Robert King for granting us the privilege of sharing his story with the Meat and Three community. Learn more about King, the Angola 3, and other guests and topics we touched on this week by checking out our show notes.
This episode was reported by Hannah Chenard, Addison Austin Liu, and me, Jessica Gingrich.
Jess also lead produced this episode with support from Addison Austin Liu, Elizabeth Fisher, and Sam Girardi. H. Conley was the editor for this episode. Meat and Three is produced by H. Conley and me, Taylor Early. Our audio engineer for this episode was Armin Spengen. Our theme song was composed by Breakmaster Cylinder. This program is supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. Meat and Three is powered by Simplecast. Meat and Three is a production of Heritage Radio Network, the world's pioneer food radio station. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org and follow us at heritage_radio. And please stay in touch. Whether you have a story idea or just like to say hey, write us at ideas@meetand3.nyc. That's all spelled out.
Craft cocktails, from the classics to zero-proof drinks, are all around us. But what if we told you that craft cocktails are actually a relatively recent addition to the culinary scene? My name is Toni Tipton-Martin, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Cook's Country at America's Test Kitchen. I want to introduce you to a podcast mini-series I'm hosting called 100 Proof, The Journey of the American Cocktail. Over 6 episodes, we'll look at how mixed drinks offer us a window into what was happening in America during the dawn of the cocktail. We'll then take you to the present day to contemplate what forces led to our modern cocktail renaissance. And along the way, we'll of course be sharing cocktail recipes with you. Subscribe to Proof from America's Test Kitchen so you won't miss the first episode. It drops on Thursday, May 23rd. Again, that's Proof, Proof, from America's Test Kitchen. Cheers.